It's less than 2 hours past midnight, December 8th, 1941, and Tokyo is asleep. But right now, a few hundred miles off the coast of Hawaii, scores of Japanese warplanes take off from the decks of aircraft carrier as the dawn rises. Yes, December 8th, 1941. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute. You may be a bit confused right now, but it is true. When it is 6:10 a.m. December 7th, 1941 in Hawaii, it is already December 8th in Japan. Here in Hawaii, we have a half-hour time zone. Tokyo time is 19 and a half hours ahead. This information will become very important as this series progresses, as will the 5.5-hour time difference from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. This series will cover the events of December 7th, 1941 Hawaiian time as they unfold on and around Hawaii, minute by minute as they happen in real time. But to understand the whole story, I will also cover, though not chronologically, the months of diplomacy, the years of technological advancement, the theories of attack and defense, and the stories of the people involved that led up to this moment in time as Japan's Kido Butai, First Air Fleet, the world's largest fleet of aircraft carriers, now launches its attack on the American Pacific Fleet at anchor on Oahu, Hawaii. The planes all take off within 15 minutes. 2 of 185 failed to do so. Success depends on surprise and striking power. Surprise will only be assured if they can get to within 200 miles undetected. They sail virtually blind. No radar, no recon planes sent out in front. They send no radio messages. All 6 of Japan's carriers are here today, carrying 417 aircraft, 138 fighters, 135 dive bombers, and 144 B-5N bombers for both torpedo and horizontal bombing, 2 fast battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, and an 8-tanker supply group round out the surface ships. 23 submarines are here for recon and for sinking any ships that escape the harbor. And midget submarines. Oh yes, midget submarines, which I will get to in a minute. Mitsuo Fuchida leads this wave of planes, and he watches the first take off, himself still on the deck of Akagi, the flagship of Kido Butai.
From the command center, a green light was swung in a large circle, and this was the order to commence launching. The plane started to take off from the forward area where the fighters were positioned. As soon as the sound of the engine became louder, the plane started to move. The pitch of the ship was still strong, and the flight deck was constantly dipping into the sea surface. People watching the departure held their breath. Then, at the next moment, the plane took off smoothly from the ship. Soon the next plane followed and took off, and the next. There was a sudden outburst of banzai, and caps, handkerchiefs, and hands were shaken with great energy.
January 1940. Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet, writes that war with the United States seems inevitable, and if so, it must be settled on the first day at or around Pearl Harbor, and this can only be done with naval air power from carriers. He sends this idea to Naval Minister Koshiro Oikawa and to a subordinate admiral, who shows it to the famous fighter pilot Minoru Genda. Genda loves the idea, for he too thinks it is air power and aircraft carriers that will now win wars. Most in the Navy Department, however, do not support Yamamoto's idea. Partly because if it fails, it will be the end of a big chunk of the Imperial Navy, and anyhow, war might not be inevitable. The US has yet to use force to try and stop Japan's advance in either China or Indochina. Now, just because Yamamoto thinks it inevitable, he really does not want a war with the US to be fought. But Japan is in the 5th year of its war in China, a resource drain. They have also now moved into southern Indochina, which has prompted the Allies to impose sanctions that cut off their supply of oil. The hardliners in power in Japan are not willing to give up empire or face the humiliation of troop withdrawal just for the restoration of foreign trade, and are going to take the resources they need from British and Dutch colonies in Southeast Asia, no matter who gets in their way.
I was on the first plane spearheading the groups, and I made a long circle above the fleet to confirm the arrangement of the flying formation. The assembly of the first wave of the air attack squadron was completed in 15 minutes. I then turned the indicator needle to Oahu Island while flying above the flagship Akagi. It was 6:15 a.m.
There is, though, an American carrier that might actually get in their way today. Task Force 8, led by the carrier Enterprise, is returning from Wake Island and is some 215 miles west of Pearl with the cruisers Northampton, Salt Lake City, and Chester, and the destroyers Dunlap, Elliott, Fanning, Benham, Gridley, McCall, Craven, Maori, and Balch. Enterprise now launches 21 planes to scout an arc northeast to southeast of the ship, a routine exercise just to see what's out there. Kido Butai is, however, north of Oahu. They have come in from that side to maximize surprise. They left Hitokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands in the desolate far north of Japan already November 26 to put into practice years of theory. See, even after the formation of the Japanese 1st Carrier Division in 1928, naval aviation was seen as a force multiplier, not a decisive factor in battle on its own. Aircraft was for a supporting role, but with new planes and new training, carriers soon got more and more attention. The annual fleet maneuvers, which always pit the Japanese Blue Fleet against the American Red Fleet, show that carrier attack planes can decisively sway the surface battle in favor of the Japanese. The 1934 draft instructions for air combat lay down the role of naval aircraft as attack weapons. They can reach further than the range of naval guns and can attack enemy targets in the battle line. By 1937, the doctrines go a step further, that now carrier attacks are to be directed specifically against enemy aircraft carriers in a preemptive strike, preferably before the enemy is able to launch its own aircraft. Once the enemy is crippled in the air, the bombers can concentrate on the enemy battleships. So, although the doctrines still have been centered on a fleet against fleet battle, they have laid the basic groundwork for today's attack. It is the Japanese way to always remain on the offensive. So cohesion and striking power are the main impetus behind any carrier attack. All training and aircraft design revolves around this concept. Historians debate the impact of the British attack at Taranto in November 1940 on Japanese planning for today. The British Royal Navy carrier fleet attacked the anchored Italian fleet at Taranto then with torpedo bombers and did it serious damage, disabling 3 battleships, damaging a heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers, and destroying 2 fighters, killing 59 and wounding 600, for the loss of only 2 men killed, 2 men captured, and 2 planes downed. British Commander Andrew Cunningham said, "Taranto should be remembered as having shown once and for all that in the fleet air arm, the Navy has its most devastating weapon." Overall, though, the war in Europe has had little impact on Japanese naval planning. After all, the Royal Navy has faced no enemy aircraft carriers at all, and there hasn't been a great all-out battle, nor is one expected. But there will be battle here today, and hopefully, for the Japanese at least, one-sided. And Fuchida is certainly excited about it.
I was full of enthusiasm and courage in the lead position. The first plane of the first wave of the entire attacking force, shouldering the destiny of my beloved country. I must somehow have anticipated this scene during my childhood when I first wanted to be a soldier. Then I was surely born to be a warrior of the Japanese Empire. Back in those days, I did not take it seriously when my father believed in the notion of being born under a lucky star, but now I understood that I was exactly the one who had been born under a good star. My past days of youth were indeed just for this one day. Okay, I will leave nothing undone in today's command of the battle.
Fuchida is by now in the air at 9,800 feet above the clouds, flying at 125 knots. Dozens of torpedo bombers are among those flying to the attack, and they have an interesting history. In July 1924, the Japanese conduct regular bombing trials on naval vessels off the coast of Yokosuka. The Japanese naval bombers are only able to hit the designated target around 20 times. Everything else, and it is a lot of everything else, misses. High altitude horizontal bombing was just too inaccurate, and unless bombers attacked in large numbers and tight formations, the percentage of direct hits was very low. So they looked for alternatives. Now, the preferred weapon of the Japanese Navy had always been the torpedo. But from planes, such aerial torpedoes would have to be small enough and light enough to be carried by aircraft in the first place, but at the same time, big enough to carry a strong explosive charge and rugged enough to withstand the impact of being dropped from any great height into the water. This tech problem is addressed in 1931 with the Type 91 aerial torpedo. Its thick hull can carry 300 pounds of explosives and is also aerodynamic and hydrodynamic enough to avoid pitch and yaw in both the air and the water. Naval Command is sure that 4 or 5 hits by these would topple even the strongest battleship. They may know for sure soon, for at 6:20 a.m., Mitsuo Fuchida gives the signal, and the first wave sets course for Oahu. Another major technological jump for torpedo bombing is the appearance of medium bombers in the mid-1930s. Nakajima develops the B-5N, a modern medium bomber that has a great operational range and is sturdy enough to carry such torpedoes effectively into battle. Although the torpedoes could then be launched at a range of 1.2 miles and a speed of 42 knots, with a long, straight approach, the bomber itself is very vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. But for a surprise attack against neatly arrayed anchored targets like today, the torpedo bombers should have a field day. However, there is another problem. Japanese military planners have studied potential harbor attacks at Manila, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and all have the same common feature. They are shallow harbors. At an average depth of 50 to 75 feet, standard aerial torpedoes will bury themselves in the sand at the bottom. So for Pearl Harbor, special modifications to the Type 97 torpedo have to be made. Gyro-controlled contra-rotating fins keep the torpedoes on track, and a new training regimen for pilots over the shallow waters of Kagoshima Bay has been instituted to make sure the pilots can execute shallow water torpedo attacks. Pearl Harbor is a shallow harbor. In fact, the maximum depth is just 60 feet. Outside of the harbor, the Pacific waters are deep, however, and there has been a lot of strange and suspicious action in those waters over the past few hours. At 3:42 a.m., the American minesweeper Condor is patrolling just outside Pearl Harbor when they see an unusual white wave around 100 yards away from them heading for Pearl. Through binoculars, it looks like a submarine's periscope moving through the water. When it's about 50 yards from the Condor, it veers off, apparently having seen the ship. Condor sends the news to the patrolling destroyer Ward by signal light at 3:58. Ward's skipper, William Outerbridge, is awakened. This is actually the first time he's ever gotten an alert as skipper, for tonight is his first night on his first patrol on his first ship command. Really? He sounds general quarters, and the men take their battle stations, but they cannot find any sub. The gate in the anti-torpedo net across the harbor is opened for the minesweeper Crossbill to enter at 8 minutes past 5. Normally, the gate would be closed behind the ship, but with Condor also soon to enter, it doesn't seem worth the trouble. Condor enters at 5:32, and the gate remains open. The tugboat Kiyosankwa is due to leave the harbor at 6:15. So Condor's packing up for the night in the harbor, and Ward radios for that sub's distance and heading to carry on searching. The Condor gives a misleading answer. See, the first message was the sub's course when last seen. And this is the one when first seen. But they don't explain that between those two, the sub changed course. So Ward goes off searching where the sub pretty solidly cannot be. The Bishop's Point radio station at the harbor entrance hears all this traffic, but does not pass it on. Neither does Ward, because neither did Condor, and they were the ones who saw it, whatever it is, so they must have decided it's not a sub. But make no mistake, it is a Japanese submarine, and it should not be at Pearl Harbor. Well, no Japanese warships or warplanes should be, but the planes are certainly on their way. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is the actual leader of the Kido Butai and has been since April. A lot of people questioned the decision for him to lead the first air fleet. He got the post because of seniority, though he's only in his early 50s. But Admiral Tsukahara describes Nagumo as an officer of the old school, a specialist of torpedo and surface maneuvers. He did not have any idea of the capability and potential of naval aviation. That's interesting because Nagumo is just 9 days older than Tsukahara. Well, anyhow, as soon as the last plane has taken off, Nagumo orders the first air fleet to turn south again at 20 knots. The second wave is now being hoisted up the flight decks. It's been a long road for Japan to get to this point today, and it really began in earnest in 1940, but just over the past 6 weeks, the final decisions have been made in Tokyo. On November 1st, the 3 courses most of Japanese high command see open to them are discussed at the liaison conference. The liaison conferences are basically war councils between the emperor, his foreign minister, the army and navy ministers, and the army and navy chiefs of staff. Course 1. Avoid war at the expense of great disadvantage. In other words, accept Washington's proposals to leave China and Indochina. 2. Wage war to get what they want. 3. Opt for war, but still continue the military buildup and see if maybe negotiations with DC can go somewhere. This meeting takes 17 hours, and option 1 is ruled out straight off the bat. They all think it would make Japan look like a third-rate power. Option 2 is the one the Army and Navy chiefs want, taking advantage of the Allied weakness while it lasts, which I'll talk about eventually, but it does not get a majority. There remained the third option, which would entail close coordination between military planning and the conclusion of the final round of negotiations, as well as intensified cooperation with the European Axis powers designed to pin down Japan's future enemies in the Atlantic European area. For climatic and meteorological reasons, the beginning of the monsoon season, offensive operations would have to be launched in early December, or failing that, postponed until the spring. That left barely 4 weeks to make a last attempt to reach an accommodation with the United States. On November 5th, 2 proposals, A and B, are approved at Imperial Conference. A is submitted to the US, but it does not have any concessions beyond the previous offers, and even demands Japan be allowed to station troops in China for decades. That is a non-starter, and so B is submitted November 20th. This is really just a modus vivendi, though, and does not consider withdrawing from China or from the tripartite pact with the other Axis powers. But if these demands are in fact met, then there are to be more demands. War will come in early December. Everyone now agrees to all of this, though Emperor Hirohito does ask a few embarrassing questions like how can they justify invading Thailand, Southeast Asia's only independent country? I mean, you can't say they are a tool of European powers. But this is just brushed aside. The Japanese in mid-November wrapped up the last details of their political plans. Thailand would be occupied and all foreign concessions in China seized. The Japanese would crush Britain, arrange a German-Soviet separate peace, and after defeating the US, offer to sell her rubber and tin as an inducement to get her to accept Japan's dominance of East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific. There was only one possible fly in the ointment. The US might, at the last moment, make an offer that some in the Japanese government might wish to accept. Like the Germans, the Japanese did not intend to be cheated of war. Washington actually knows from intelligence intercepts that Proposal B has a time limit and that Japan is readying for war. Against someone. They just don't know who. A decrypted message to Ambassador Nomura that all negotiations must cease by November 29th is a pretty good hint. And already the 25th, Japanese convoys with troops aboard ship are sighted south of Formosa. This intelligence comes from MAGIC. That is an American cryptoanalysis project that can read a Japanese diplomatic code, which they call purple, but not the naval codes. The diplomatic traffic makes no mention of any actual attack. I will talk more about this later. Right now, additional reconnaissance planes from the Japanese battleships Hiei, Kirishima, and heavy cruisers Tone and Chikuma are sent out to search for possible American ships and planes. 6:30 a.m. Reconnaissance planes from the Enterprise are now scouting the area. No ships and no planes are in sight. The area is safe, but the Japanese are still to the north, undiscovered.
朝6時30分、日の出。
It was 6:30 in the morning and the sun was rising. Below us, there was a vast expanse of a sea of clouds, all in white, looking like someone had spread floss all over. As soon as the eastern sky started to turn to a cobalt color, a huge, immense sun peeped through the clouds. It was a burning crimson ball. Then, the brilliant rays of the sun shone all over. It looked exactly as if our naval flag filled the entire sky. I took this to mean the dawn of Japan.
Also at 6:30, there is more news from the destroyer Ward. See, that tugboat that I said left the harbor 15 minutes ago is by now heading to meet Antares, a supply ship, and take over the towing of a barge from her. Antares is now in sight, and Ward is like a mile away from her. When Antares crosses Ward's bow, people on the Ward see a black something between Antares and the barge. They soon decide that it's a submarine conning tower. What it is, in fact, is a Japanese midget submarine. The midget submarines, known as Type A Kohaiteki, are top secret weapons, originally designed to take part in open battle with the US fleet. The Type A midget submarine is 78.5 feet long with a submerged displacement of 46 tons. Each one is armed with two 17.7-inch torpedoes, a modified version of the Type 97 torpedo, successors to the Type 91. Because of limited storage capabilities, the midgets are only any use at short range, so should one be captured, it will be obvious it was launched from somewhere nearby. The decision to use midget submarines at Pearl Harbor was approved by Yamamoto back in early October, under the codename Shinki, Divine Turtle, sort of. The midget submarines are to be part of the special attack group of 5 standard submarines, I-16, 18, 20, 22, and 24. The submarines were initially to reach Pearl Harbor on December 3rd, and then lie in wait for the next few days 300 nautical miles south of Oahu, slowly closing in on the harbor entrance. The midgets were to be launched from their mother subs only after the air raid had begun, but Yamamoto altered the plan for them to enter the harbor before the attack. This change in planning is much to the dismay of the air crews, who fear that the early detection of submarines might spoil the whole surprise attack. By this morning, however, all 5 mother subs have made it undetected to a position south of Pearl Harbor. Between 12:42 and 3:33 a.m., all 5 midget submarines, 16, 18, 19, 20, and 22, are successfully launched. Now, I've been talking about small tactical operations like these little subs and planes taking off, and even a carrier group off of Hawaii at sea, but this whole thing, everything that happens today, is just one cog in a large machine. Okay, Yamamoto believes Japan cannot win a war of attrition with the US, as I said, right? And when the current ongoing American naval building program is complete in 1943, he knows Japan will be totally outclassed at sea. So the attack on the fleet at Pearl Harbor today, his and Genda's baby, is only part of a much larger offensive to win big and win quick. The Imperial Japanese Navy needs its carriers and planes for the Pearl Harbor attack. But the Imperial Japanese Army is going to make simultaneous attacks this morning all over Southeast Asia. They have even temporarily reduced forces in Manchuria, their Manchurian puppet state of Manchukuo that they've occupied since 1932, so that a 2-direction main attack on the Philippines and Malaya can take place. Army and Navy commands have agreed that the operations that start today will happen in 3 phases. Phase 1, eliminate any threat from the flanks. This will involve many surprise attacks at once. First, neutralize the American fleet at Pearl Harbor and the American Air Force on the Philippines. Then, take Thailand to use as a land bridge for operations against Malaya and Burma. Third, make landings in northern Malaya and the Kra Isthmus to get a jumping off point for an assault on Singapore. Fourth, take Wake Island, Guam, and the Gilbert Islands to cut off American sea links with the Philippines. Fifth, occupy Hong Kong. after these surprise attacks, they will land on the Philippines. Phase 2 is to be for development and consolidation. First, capture Singapore and crush resistance in Malaya. Second, set up air bases in southern Burma. Third, occupy the northern part of the Dutch East Indies and the Bismarck Archipelago. Phase 3, occupy Sumatra, Java, and all of Burma and all of the Philippines. Japan will then have an enormous, resource-rich empire. And since the Japanese do not think much of the mainly colonial troops they will likely encounter during all of this, the timetables are pretty quick. They plan on just 50 days to conquer the Philippines, 100 for Malaya, and 150 for the entire Dutch East Indies and its sprawling archipelago. They do not consider trying to defeat the US in a head-on war first and then dictating peace terms. They also do not believe that Britain or the US will fully mobilize all their resources for a long conflict far from their centers of power. There are potential problems with this big plan. The occupied territory is to be secured with a chain of air and naval bases, right? And they will engage the enemy's fleet when it comes. They do not, however, prioritize protecting their own sea routes or destroying the enemy's sea routes, which could be a big issue. Also, raw materials can only reach the Japanese home islands in large quantities by sea. So here are some nerdy numbers. Okay, before today, Japan needs some 10 million GRT, gross registered tonnage, per year of shipping to get enough stuff to get by. 6 million comes from Japanese ships, and 4 million from chartered neutral ships, mainly British, Dutch, and American ones. Just for phases 1 and 2 of operations though, Japan will need 3.9 million GRT to supply the Army and Navy. They're also going to lose some tonnage sunk in the coming war though, and seizing enemy vessels isn't nearly going to make up for the loss of those contracted before the war either. So the home islands are only going to be supplied by 3 million GRT or so, which will supply the minimum basic food and industrial supplies to survive, but no increase will be possible. Japan also has a serious lack of shipping space and shipyard capacity to begin with, and having a huge new imperial shipping network with inadequate transport or transport routes and with little or no naval protection for them might be a real Achilles heel in future. Well, that's stuff I suppose they'll consider in future. For the attacks on Hong Kong and Malaya are synchronized for today with the attack on Hawaii. Pearl Harbor is to be hit at 7:55 local time December 7th, which is 3:25 Tokyo time December 8th. Singapore is to be bombed at 4 a.m. December 8th local time, which is 5 a.m. Tokyo time. But the Malaya landings begin 45 minutes after midnight local time, which means they have already been in progress for nearly half an hour. And Hong Kong will be hit at 8 a.m. December 8th local time. That's 9 a.m. Tokyo time, just a few hours from now. The Japanese, wherever they attack, do expect a military response from the United States, who have a potentially threatening military base in the Philippines. So it seems essential to the Japanese to eliminate that and other US island possessions to keep back America's Pacific Fleet, since that's the only fighting force in the Pacific that has any realistic chance at all of stopping Japanese aggression at this point. Or so the Japanese think. But they are missing something here. They miss that if they do nothing to the US possessions and leave them alone, if they don't bother them at all, President Franklin Roosevelt will have a pretty hard time getting Congress to agree to a major military operation to protect someone else's colonies in Southeast Asia. I mean, the Dutch? The US will go to war with Japan to protect Dutch colonies in Asia? The Dutch, whose home country is now part of Germany? I wouldn't be too sure about that. What I am sure of, though, is that 9 minutes ago a Japanese midget submarine was spotted just outside Pearl Harbor, and Captain Outerbridge is about to call his men to their battle stations once again. What will happen then? Has the sub ruined the surprise of the Japanese attack? An attack that first and foremost relies on surprise to have a chance of success? Stay tuned to find out.